All right, everyone who made it through TAL. TAL's a very hard person to follow because he's very technical and very good. But my name is Brian Ray. I'm the organizer, and I don't present much, but I find presenters a lot, as well as venues, as well as you, hopefully, and beer, food sometimes. So, and I do write Python, believe it or not. Some people wondered, but I actually do write some Python. So my latest project's Marmir. Pronunciation is yet to be determined, but it's a combination of my girls' names. And it's actually XLWT on steroids. So I got a little sick of the way it works. So there's a couple of projects out there that are predominant in generating Excel spreadsheets out there, XLWT and OpenPyXL, which does the newer version of the Excel files. Both of them generate native files, which is interesting, which means they run on any platform. How many people out here has been asked to generate a spreadsheet at some point in their life? All right. So in the development cycle, does that happen? Scrum, I don't care. Waterfall, when does that happen? Does it happen like at the beginning when they want the reports, or is it like 30 minutes before it goes fucking live? Excuse my French. Edit that out. So yeah, so basically the most neglected part of the project sometimes is the reports, and and when you come down to it, when you look at all this NoSQL out there, you look at all this data, it really does boil down to eventually having some subset of data that someone can look at and actually mean something. I know, believe it or not, someone sitting behind a desk looking at the data that actually equivalates to something and perhaps even doing calculations on it. Hey, someone wants to look at their data. So that's what this project's really geared toward. It's geared towards the spreadsheet. It's geared toward taking arbitrary almost data in some cases and generating Excel spreadsheets that actually look pretty and are easy to generate. Easy, what I mean, you send it a dictionary of data, you get a spreadsheet, you go home, you drink beer. Basically, that's the workflow I'm talking about. And something I badly needed. So my life was surrounded by WXLT world. And here's the simplest of simply hello world examples. It doesn't say hello world, but basically it's a very simple example that generates some data in a cell. And if you notice, it works on a very primal functional programming level where you tell it what cell by 0 index 0 and you just throw it a string. Great. You take it a bit further, you can do other stuff with it, but you end up building some code around it, you make it object-oriented and stuff, and you end up with my project Marmir, basically. So I'm saving you that work, hopefully. So here's an example straight out of the test docs. You basically send it some dictionary data. Everybody notices dictionary data. I even left my trailing comma there so you know it's not JSON, just so you know. And so it generates this automatically. In fact, I'll do this right now live if you just really want to get wacky here with me for a second. This is going to be crazy, so just hold on for a second. This is the good stuff. All right, so how do you do it? All right, so this is my unit test. Actually, I will show you actual code here just because we want to prove that we are Python here after Tal's talk. So, so here it is. Here's that same example. And it's just they're unit tests, but they're really more functional tests. Here's another example with that's more advanced, and I'm going to execute it now. Hold on to your seat. This is going to get crazy. Oh, hey. All right. Oh, that was pretty crazy. All right, so here's my Excel sheets here that I just generated. I'm going to open it in Microsoft Word. I mean Excel. Just kidding. It's OpenOffice. And so you notice the generation of the spreadsheet. One interesting point and goal of the project is that the types are what you send it. So you send it integers, it gives you integers. You send it a string, it sends you, and same with date time. So that's a big advantage of the project. That's the first advantage of the project is it knows those types in a way and they convert them properly. So that when I'm Mr. Doing business analyst person, I can go ahead and do some calculations on that spreadsheet fairly easily, just like I did there. 1 + 2 = 3, unless it's binary. So The one big thing that I heard people complaining about when I got on the internet is that the column width thing, the column width problem, saying, hey, I got to adjust these columns to fit this text in the Excel spreadsheet or whatever I'm generating it in. Here's my WTH, and it's like, so I got 256, it's 1/26 of pixel times 20, because I got 20 characters. I set the column width. This is not my example. This is XLWT. This is how it does it. So it's just kind of guessing. It doesn't matter if it's Arial or Times New Roman, and when you know it, it's off, right? Anybody could tell that because it doesn't take it in. So what I actually did is Marmir actually takes, it has a dictionary. First, it has a library called, I think I labeled it on the next slide. Well, it has a function in it called getStringWidth. That's what all you really need to know. And you tell it the font name that you want and the point size and the string that you're checking, and it gives you the actual width in points back. So how do we do this? Well, there's also another script in there that takes all the known Microsoft fonts that are basically in there, and it calculates all the kerning pairs as well as the character widths. And it generates, so I know that a P with an underscore, like in this example, is 171 pixels wide at 12 point, and then you can scale it back and down based off 12 point as a baseline. Subtract -3 to that width, and then the width of the underscore, and that's your true width of that string. So it pickles that data and it stores it in binary in the actual project, and it has all the fonts that you would generally see in an Excel spreadsheet. So it gives you actual character widths. I know, this is just, it's amazing that we haven't done this already, isn't it? So it's, but it's there, and it uses some caching and stuff in order so it generates those fairly quickly. But go back to one of the points of the project. A date's a date, an integer is what they call in Excel land a number, and a string's a string, and so on and so forth. A more advanced example then is, now I want to say, I want to explicitly say this is a date and I want it formatted a certain way. Who here, does that date formatting look familiar to anyone here? Probably anyone? Yeah, so this is the general one. So basically you give mm.date, you give it the date that you would have before in context of that, and you give it to string formatting. And in the background, it'll take that and it'll convert that to the formatting needed by Excel to generate the same display of that date. So that's how it works behind the scenes. So you can pretty much play with any formatting you're using anywhere else, and it'll generate that in the spreadsheet that comes out. So so the formatting in here, if I went to format this cell, it basically looks like the formatting that I send it. This is the default, by the way. And I'll get to the configuration. So you can configure those things too, and we'll get to that. So, and then if you have a URL, if you have a string, whatever, it respects those types or figures them out automatically. So that's pretty much the advanced example. As far as advanced, as far as being very explicit about the type of thing you're sending it. Now this is the crazy diagram. I was going to promise this at the beginning that I was going to give you a crazy diagram because crazy diagrams really are fun. But this is a crazy diagram of how the system's put together, how the library's put together. And the reason I'm showing this is that you can replace any one of these parts if you're using this library. I'll run through this real quick. So the data model that you see kind of like dead center at the top, that's kind of, when you send a data in the earliest example, it builds that data model by looking at the first row of data and trying to figure out the types, and then mapping those to these types that are on the right side here of the screen. So those types are the native types that then can be converted into other types if it needs to. So that's a date time field, int field, URL, all the ones that you can explicitly call if you're using the advanced method. It also has a serializer, and that generates a grid base. A grid base basically is a two-dimensional array of the grid of the spreadsheet that you're generating with the classes kind of outlined with the overrides built into it, so they're ready to be populated. And then when you call it calls basically populate. So then it goes through all your real data, and it populates it based on that grid mechanism and the serialization for it. And then it sends those things to what's called a document that holds that, and it holds these data models, the serialization, an instance of the data and the grid, and you send it a composer. And a composer in this case is broke up to a composer XLS. It's a subclass of a base composer, and that's the one that generates your Excel sheet. So you see at the bottom right, that's your Excel sheet there. And the reason I'm kind of showing this, and there's also on the left side here, there's that config. It's hard to see. I could probably blow this up in a different view here if I could figure out how these fancy programs work these days. Not being a Visio user here, but let me show you the config, and you can send this config in if you wish. So this would be basically your basic style of your spreadsheet. If you want to freeze a column, as you will in Excel, this is alternating styles here, if that's what you want your default to be. So one will be blue, one will be white background sort of thing. This is if you want to adjust those column widths. If you don't care about your column widths, you can turn that off. Here's that date format we just saw. Here's just a plain date format, date time format. Here's plain date, and here's a plain time format. And obviously there's other configurations that'll go into it. Those are kind of your defaults if you're not overriding them. So you set those in, and it kind of just generates your Excel sheet based on that. So then it goes to document.write, and the composer runs, and it runs the Excel sheet. So the point of these parts is, from a serialization point, you don't need to read this data in, as a dictionary or whatever. You can send whatever serializer you want, and it'll work just in place. You just subclass what's called base serializer, and you can build your own serializer class to send it. You can send your data model explicitly if you wanted to. So you don't need it to build automatically a data model. You can have it build it in yourself. You can throw, obviously you can throw your own data at it, of course, and you can throw your own configuration. And the most interesting part with the serialization is that's where you could say, instead of sending it this dictionary, I'll send this a model form, a Django model set or query set, and that's what it'll serialize off of. So that's just an example of how I can use this in Django. So, and then on the composer side, say I don't really want to compose to Excel. What I really want to compose to is one of the other modules called Composer Google, and that'll send it to GData, which will also do the communication of that data off to Google Spreadsheets. So if you say you want it instead of you don't want it in Excel, you just want it in Google, you can do that. So you just subclass it and generate it, and it just works. So that's why you'd want to play with these modules. But when you get down to it, 90, maybe 80% of everybody would probably want this example right here, where you just send it just send a dictionary, just make me a freaking spreadsheet, let me see it, right? So, and that's basically the value of the project is just making it simple, and that's it. I mean, that's pretty much Marmir. It's on GitHub. I could probably bring it up if I have an internet access. Marmir, GitHub, there it is. So if you go to me in GitHub, I think it has 1,000 followers or something, like 2,000 stars or something like that. Okay, 4. Oh, well, I was rounding up a little bit. All right. So yeah, it's not widely known and it hasn't really had a release yet, but it does try to be like a cool Ruby-like Markdown format here. But it also has, what seems to be, some more Python-oriented type documentation here. But it has, it has a README, obviously, with these same examples I just showed you. It has some goals here about the project, some other stuff it would like to do, summaries and stuff like that it doesn't do yet. And it also has some dev notes here that basically outlines exactly what I just told you. So if you need to go back and look at it, you can just knock yourself out. So, if someone wants to hack on this and play with it, by all means, play with it, use it. Matt?
I have a question about the composer. that's the component that actually generates the binary Excel file. Does that use the same backend to do that as XLWT?
Yeah. So I took the XLWT sources and I brought them into the project, and I made some optimizations on them. And so you'll see there's these lib, font core, XLDate, and XLWT 7.2. I also filed a ticket with XLWT to update it to 3.0, and they said we said we're getting around to it. I might beat them to it. I might just have a weekend and I'll beat them to it. So, hey, if I replace them or whatnot, so be it. In fact, so like a Composer, for instance, Composer is already subclassed from Composer base, and even the default example. So things like iterate grid, those are in Composer base. It has things like write header, which you could override in your subclass, and finish, and actually not much more there than that. Within the method of iterate grid, it does things like end row or start new row. There's certain things you have to have defined in your subclass of that. So when you get to the Composer base, this is where it isolates all that XLWT code, and you'll see it go through and do stuff here based on the type. It'll do the formatting. Some of the stuff it just doesn't do anything that you just have to subclass. You have to define it, or it'll yell at you. Writing the cell. Here's a done right cell method. This was when it was fixing the widths. It checks the widths. Based on that string method we were talking about. Here's where it sets some options based on the configuration that I was talking about earlier. Here's the run method that just goes through. It looks just like XLW. You'll end up with this code. If you write a lot of spreadsheets with XLW, you'll end up with this code, I guarantee you. Everybody does, and I guarantee you, I've seen it like 13 times the last 9 years I've been doing Chippy, And it's just basically everyone's code is exactly the same. It does some things about like it does some things about the output method and stuff like that, where that's separated out. So when it actually says I'm going to write to disk, it does that in some other area. So there's a write method and a write string method, and there could potentially be a write to socket or a write to web service method or something like that. So, does that answer your question? Yeah. Okay.
Are you going to be able to add calculations into?
Yeah. So the calculations you can add. You can add any BIF record. It supports all the BIF record types. That an XLS standard format does. It has access to those, and those are all in there, and you can get to them. So there's a balance here. So generally, my rule of thumb with this is that you want to leave your spreadsheet in a calculatable state, but leave the calculations out. Leave those for the recipient of that Excel sheet to do. Except when it comes to things like perhaps like even with summaries and stuff like that. When I haven't done the summary line yet. That's one of the features that we want in it. But I think that's going to actually be that we'll calculate that for them in that case. But long as the types are right, they can run their own calculations on the spreadsheets when they get them. Whoever's using them, the consumer of the spreadsheets. Does that make sense? I mean, I think it's really up to you. It's just a framework. But that's my general rule of thumb: is put things in the right type and allow people to do with it what they want to do with it easily. Also, just getting the column widths right was like something I haven't seen so much. So, any more questions?
Going off of that, can you do graphs or charts?
Yeah, no. I mean, you can, but you kind of have to play with the BIF records a lot if you want to do Excel ones, and that's all dependent on the interpreter of that Excel sheet. You get out of the realm of standard Excel at that point to do that. You can embed a graphic of a graph. You can have an image. You have an image type there, and you can use that to put that into a cell. But it's truly embedded in the cell at this point. There was an old project called Django Excel spreadsheets that I wrote. I didn't actually even write it. People that worked for me wrote it, and it's kind of a nightmare project, and it does tons of stuff. But that's one of the things it does do is it writes images. So back to the calculatable state sort of thing, I kind of veer on the side of saying give them the graph at that point. Use matplotlib or something. Give them the graph and give them an image of the graph at that point. If they want, if the consumer or the person gets it, wants their own graph, they'll have the data in the cells to generate their own graph using the tools that they have available in the program that's used to read that Excel sheet. But you don't really know what program they're going to be open. I'm using OpenOffice. Someone is using a, Microsoft. Someone else is uploading it to Google. Someone else is using something else. So, any other questions?
I have a feature request actually. Or maybe I'll buy this for $1 million. So I have spreadsheets, I'll call them templates, that already have charts and calculations and a lot of things, and I would actually like to inject data into them.
Right.
But I want to do it smartly. I don't just want to put the text in here. I actually want to do some parsing of that template and to put it at the right place, maybe logically according to the event. So that might mean incorporating a parser as well.
Yeah. So I've done that on my own version of that because I needed to get a style. I did it for styles. So I wanted to send it a base Excel sheet, and then what it does is there's a config builder. I haven't contributed this yet, but it's a config builder that builds your config then. And then you can use it to generate data on top of that same Excel sheet. But as far as what you're asking for really is reading it and using other information with it. I haven't done that yet, but I believe if you use XLRD in conjunction with, or XL utils in conjunction with it, you'd be able to do something like that. But if that's a useful feature, I'm more than happy to try to make that happen. I was thinking more of a style base, of having, say, pretty color sort of thing, not necessarily calculations. The calculations could be a little harder. It's just even going from the date formats to each other took me a good 20 minutes or an hour, okay, a day. But, developer time. Yeah, so it can be hard if you're reading the formulas to do something with it. But you can do it. I mean, you have access to the formulas, but you have to kind of then figure out what those formulas are saying and translate them into something you can use, as a new formula or something like that, or what it's actually doing. It can get really hard, but I don't know if that answers your question.
My dream would be to have something like a DMM, that I could take an Excel spreadsheet, open it, and have just an object model, do my manipulations there in the tree, and do the same and that's it. That's a different API than what you created, just to generate it.
But definitely the saving back part would help. You could do it with. That's a lofty. This is a lightning talk. We can use G-objects. Any other questions? All right, guys. So ran off to whoever Bottom Lounge, which is just down a lake.